Hello, protocols, packets, and programs. HTTP response codes from 100 to 199 are informational responses. And since this is episode 199, it'll be the most informational one possible. Luckily, the next response codes from 200 to 299 are for success. So it only gets better from here. Which means this week we talk with Nikhil Gupta about the pain points that leaders in the application security space are facing and how building a community helps. In the news segment, results from Pwn to Own, charts from the DBIR, flaws from XML, $10 million bounty from one line of code, and more. Make a request and stay tuned for Application Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. It's the show to learn the latest tools, techniques, and processes necessary to understand DevOps, application security, and cloud security. Your trusted source for the latest application security news. It's time for Application Security Weekly.
SUSE.io makes security tools for everyone. SUSE's flat rate pricing means you can set up SCA and DAST tools for your whole team. No seat counts, no scan limits, and you never have to talk to a salesperson. SUSE integrates with all common CI/CD platforms and supports most popular package managers. And thanks to SUSE's open source vulnerability scanner, license management suite, and SBOM generation capability, you can get back to what you really want to be doing, coding in no time. Visit securityweekly.com/SUSE. This is episode 199, recorded May 27th, 2022. I'm your host, Mike Shima, and I'm here with John Kinsella. Hello, John.
Mike, I am very happy it's Friday. I hope you're doing well.
That is good. We want a happy John, especially for some of the news articles we're about to cover later on. And while you think about that, you can also save $100 on your RSA Conference 2022 full conference pass. RSA Conference will be live in San Francisco this June 6th through 9th, coming soon. Security Weekly will be there in full force, delivering real-time live coverage and interviewing some of the event's top speakers and sponsors. To register using our discount code, please visit securityweekly.com/RSAC2022 and use the code 52UCyber. We'll see you there. And don't miss any of your favorite Security Weekly content. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe on any of our podcast feeds and have all new episodes downloaded right to your phone. You can also join our mailing list, Discord server, and follow us on social media and our streaming platforms. Nikhil Gupta is the founder and CEO of Armor Code. He is a successful serial entrepreneur with more than 25 years of experience leading high-growth security teams. Prior to founding Armor Code, he was the CEO and co-founder of Avid Secure, acquired by Sophos, a market-leading AI-powered multi-cloud security and compliance platform. Gupta is also one of the creators of the Purple Book community, a diverse community of security leaders who are examining issues related to software security. It started out as a project to write a book on best practices, grew into a community of hundreds of software security leaders, and has now launched its own conference, AppSecCon. Hello, Nikhil. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
So we're happy to have you here because we're looking at two aspects of AppSec, I think. One is just how can we what are these pain points that security leaders are running into today? And maybe a little bit of the background question there is, has it changed? Are we still dealing with the same pain points where we were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and later? But I'd also love to get into the community aspect as well. But first, maybe tell us a little bit about what you see as the pain points, or what this community sees about the pain points right now within AppSec.
Absolutely. So, Mike, I started my career 20 plus years ago at Bell Labs. And, as a developer, with all humility, I didn't care about security. And, 20 years forward, I'm talking about security. So, what happened here is while the software development has transformed over the last 20 years, so we used to have monolithic application. We have all microservices based application. We used to have once a year release in waterfall. Now we have the agile application development practices, and we barely used open source, and now 70 to 80% of the software is all open source, and the development is happening on the cloud. So while the application development has transformed rigorously, as you may have seen, application security is still not changed. It is still antiquated and painful. So what are the pains over there? So number one pain point over there here is You need at least a dozen tools to secure one application. Yes, you heard it right. More than 12. SES, SAS, DAS, RASP, IST, Pentesting, bug bounty, fuzzy logic. I always challenge myself to see how fast I can say that, to see if it can be of any less pain. But no. And what happens here is all the organization that you're talking about, like any from small to large company, we are a startup, we may probably have, I don't know how many applications I have, how I can secure. And god bless all these fortune 500, global 5000, or even medium to large enterprises. So that is one thing. We have all these tools which are generating a whole bunch of false positive, and companies have hundreds and thousands of application security vulnerabilities. Number two, the main problem here is that all the outputs of these tools are disparate. They're not talking to each other. So whenever an issue like Log4j happens, guess what? You have to take the outputs and you have to put it into Excel sheets, and customers are living in Excel hell. And then the third thing here is application security, as you mentioned, Mike, is not a new problem. It's been there forever. So there are three disparate organizations. So there's a security team, there's a developer community, and then there's operations. So there's a three set of people who are oppositely aligned or differently aligned, because security wants to make it secure, which inherently means slow, and developers don't care, as I said, or at least don't used to care, and they're beginning to care about it, but they want the software out yesterday, and operations want is robust. And last but not the least, the biggest pain point here is there's one application security engineer for every 100 developers. So that makes the problem even more painful. Now I'll just share what recently happened, and then I'll tell you like why we took the community route. So what happened is, like, not too long ago in December of 2020, we had SolarWinds. At that time we thought, okay, it happened, 0 day attack after 5 years, so we'll live with it. And guess what happened in December of 2021? Log4j, another 0 day for application security. So now what people are really really concerned about is what's going to happen of December 22, what's coming this Christmas. And this is a problem they don't want. Like, now people want to learn from their experiences. So while I was going through these pain points in my past life, I talked to several security leaders, and what I found out was there was no good community for the security leaders to talk about. There was no particular platform. And people told me clearly and distinctly that it's more of a people problem, not a technology problem, because there are probably 3,000 plus startups who are doing DevSecOps and all those things over there. So it's a people problem. And that's when we bunch of security leaders, we got together and created this community, which we were, like, as you said, we are going to write an open source book, which we just recently launched at NASDAQ. Was that 30 authors, very distinguished, sharing their experiences, and we launched the Purple Book. And now what happened was, we started with 30 security engineers, it became a community of 300 plus people, and now it's a big movement. And that's where we launched AppSecon, so world's largest application security conference. We had 2,200, maybe now 2,500 people. There were a lot of CPE credits there. People can still go and register and listen to the content. So it was a phenomenal success, just happened a couple of weeks ago, and I encourage people to go there and at least still access to the content.
Yeah. So there's that's quite the journey that we've got already for this intro. I want to pick apart a couple of those aspects, as you hit on some interesting areas, some paths to go out down. For example, early on, talking about DevOps, or the change from waterfall to DevOps that the engineering side of the house is doing, if you will. But it sounds like, to maybe beat up a little bit of the metaphor, application security is still doing a waterfall of sorts, or at least they're doing something that's drowning all of the dev side in vulnerabilities, whether they're false positives or not. And so we talked in the past about quality of tools, things like that. But maybe I want, instead of going down that route specifically, I want to tweak it a bit to talk more about that Log4j aspect, because you touched on people, and I think process as well is an important aspect here. And we're not going to buy a tool that protects us from the next 0 day. And I don't think we need to, we shouldn't be scrambling just to say, oh, there's another 0 day. Now what the heck do we do? It sounds like some of these security leaders are hopefully talking with each other and planning that, sure, maybe there will be another SolarWinds, another Log4j. There's got to be some better ways to prepare for it. So how are you seeing the people and process aspect of that preparation for just for the next, for whatever's going to come at the end of this 2022?
So it's a very good question, Mike. And again, in the application security conference, AppSecon, a lot of the leaders, and this was one of the hot topics. And I had the distinct pleasure to interview Bashar, who is the global CISO of Charles Schwab. And he brought up a very good point. What he mentioned was that while there are two things what people are trying to do. So one people is they're trying to move security to the left, yes, which is everyone needs to go there, and eventually we'll go there depending upon the organization side. But the other aspect, what he mentioned, and I totally agree, and as I've been talking to the other leaders, is that operations aspect is even more important, because to your point here, 0 days will continue to happen. I'm sorry, unfortunately, that's why they're called 0 day, because they will happen. But now what happens here is that when that happens, you need to have a process. So I'll just walk you through what people were doing in lack of, and I'm not trying to here and make a pitch for apps, armor code, if you will, but just I'm talking about the approach that we have taken and what we are hearing from the security leaders. So in absence of armor code or a platform like application security operations platform like armor code, what happened was 0 day like log4j happens. Now number one, organization doesn't even know how many applications they have. So first things is the board or the CEO will frantically ask the security leaders, hey, I want all of these applications to be identified that are impacted by log4j. Then I want to prioritize them, which ones are important, which one are going to be like revenue killer or a brand killer. I want them to be fixed. I want to be ensured at the same time that how it's not going to happen in future. So like one of our customers, what they did was they bought a SCA tool, which is a great tool, and they ran it on 800 repositories. And then what they did was they connected the SCA tool directly to Jira ticketing system for the flow. And guess what? They created 4,000 tickets. And instead of reducing the work, they created more work for them. And when the security team did their job, quote unquote, and got to the engineering team said, there are so many false positive. Historically, I know that. And so now the task was pushed back into the security team to go ahead and fix it. Now, how does a platform like Armor Code can help? So first things first is we plug into all the various types of various tools and also to the ticketing system so that we can streamline the flow. So now what happens here is a 0 day attack like log4j happens. You go and you type in the platform, show findings including log4j. As simple as that. So we have customers who have 500,000 or a million findings, and you may find just 500 or 10,000, not 10,000, like that's for 10 million, sorry, for a very large customer, but in general you will find a very small one. So in this particular customer case, what we happened was we logged in and we showed them 760 repositories were inactive, because it's like as any developer will know, it's like a photos on your iPhone today, where basically you just take the photos, you never delete. So repositories are like that, and not necessarily you want to go back like 2 5 years of the repositories which are inactive to search on them, because they're irrelevant. So out of 800, we identified the 4 repositories that you need, 40 repositories that you need to run on. And instead of 4,000 tickets, we created 40 tickets. So of course the work has significantly gone down. And not only that, because we integrate into the development systems and all, we could actually tell, assign issue number to Mike, and issue number 2 to John, and issue number 3 to Nikhil. So instead of spending 3 months, we brought it down to 3, and that is what the operations powerful brings to the table.
So an aspect, it's great to see that we can turn, anything from these 800 down to 40. So what's that, getting, here's the top 5%, that of action that we actually need to take. And that sounds a lot more amenable, a lot more appealing to any ops team, any developer team, to just say, okay, thank you. That's been prioritized, and fingers crossed that's still correct as well. Part of the challenges I can also imagine, though, is that just like you have a lot of these repos that collect dust, they're no longer owned. Maybe they're not even deploying to prod. I think, at least in my experience, I've still seen some of those types of repos still actually being deployed to prod. They're in revenue generating workflows, but they still don't have owners. So when we do talk about those aspects of people and process, what are the ways that you also then try to fill the gap on people? Because that's an area that we can't do our asset inventory on who owns this quite as easily.
Yeah, so asset inventory, as you said, is like a separate beast altogether, and
Hmm.
there are other large companies which are doing that. Now what happens here is, if you talk to the customers, and believe it or not, they will have hundreds of Google Excel sheets which is talking about the application owner, and then they will not be able to update it that, Nikhil left the company or Mike left the company 5 years ago, and it's still showing to Nikhil. And when the things, pardon my French here, hits the fan, guess what happens is then you come in frantically saying, hey, find Mike, and you can't find Mike. So anytime, whenever you're doing things manually, right, so this is where the process aspect come and people together, is that there is a pain which is bound to happen. So what we do here is, we actually assign and connect into whether it's your HRMS system or in fact in your repository, so you know that who actually last touched it, right? So as a result, you know who's the most current guy, because whoever may have been assigned. So whenever, the big point, Mike, I'm trying to make here is the automation, right? So like, okay, people is one aspect, and when you do things manually, then the next big thing is you have to do automation. So that is the another aspect which helps the companies.
It's definitely a fan of automation. If I do something twice, I want to turn it to bash script. If I run that bash script twice or three times, I want to turn that into probably proper code. Of course, I said I want to rather than I always do. So that's one of the catches, because even as we're talking about this, there's legacy systems, and the last person to touch code may have touched that code 2 years ago, and that's still a problem. So I'm curious too, as we've touched on a little bit of the asset inventory, the ownership, getting a risk oriented approach to AppSec, which I think is what you were describing. This is the 5% that we really need to focus on. What were some of the themes then of the community coming together? Because everyone likes to talk about these are best practices, or at least these are good practices, or maybe just these are practices that have helped us, and this is why. What were some of the interesting themes that came out of those types of discussions in this community?
So I think so. Number one thing what we did, which was very unique in the community, because there are thousands of communities. So when we started, we wanted to make sure this is not yet another community. So understanding the pain problem, we brought on the leaders with a different and differentiated background. So we had people from EV vehicle industry, we had people from financial industry, we had people from likes of the social media companies, and these are all like large Fortune 500 or global 2000 companies. And that basically kind of the differentiation, or basically the different perspectives really helps. And what we did was we broke down, and anybody should can go and should go to the purple book and go through the chapters. But what we started was with the very basics, because a lot of times people are confused what is software security versus application security versus product security. So number one thing we started with, hey, what is it? And like to call it as a software security. And in fact, very recently President Biden had this executive order talking about the same thing. So first things first is bringing everybody on the same level playing field. Then the second thing here is, like, once we are all kind of running into the same problem, because in different companies it's called different. Then the second thing becomes is why. So then there was a big education about why, right? Like, okay, why different people in different companies are kind of needing those softwares. That's what we covered. And then the third thing was like, how do you create the business case for that? That's another thing, because what happens is, like, you are a CISO, you have probably 30, maybe 35 if you're lucky, or application security budget. Now what's happening here is, as the world is moving to the cloud, right, so the and cloud providers take a lot of good care of the security, whether it is your firewalls and stuff like that. I like your cat over there.
A little
So
interruption.
no, no, absolutely. I got distracted, but for a good reason. So basically, what happens is, so then we talked about, like, why the application security budget needs to be increased and how you can build a business case. And then the third things, we also talked about software bill of material. That's another buzzword which is being talked about, right? But it's very important aspect. And then so these are the various topics that the community talk. Actually, we talk every month, twice every month, and which is a very good thing. In fact, very recently we launched a New York chapter. So for listeners who are in New York, please reach out to us. We have some very good senior leaders who are there, and what we are finding is we are having a community in Chicago, Seattle, Houston, Australia. So it's a global movement, Mike, now. And the idea here is that the broader perspectives we bring from the different part of the world's different diverse industries, the better knowledge and better we can do as a security leaders.
Yeah, tell us a bit more, especially about building the business case for security and how that works. Because we've been talking about automation and tools, obviously, but we also predicated this at the beginning, saying how important people are. So I'm curious to see or to understand, what some of these different leaders have been talking about in the sense of where they're prioritizing budget, where they're putting budget, and if they're doing a sense of log4j, 0 day or sort of fear-based, if you will, um, bumps to try to say this is why we need more money, or if they're saying we're building a program so we don't have to scramble for the next log4j, and if that's a successful alternative.
Yeah, no, I think so. You brought up a good point, and there are different leaders very differently, and depending upon the industries, yeah, some get moved by fears, and some get moved by proactively by building a programs. So a lot of leaders, what we are seeing is they are educating both the leaders as well as their leaders as well as the team that there is a need for an application security program, right? So that is very very important, and there is a big myth that historically that application security program need to be expensive and all. There are whole bunch of open source communities like OASP and all, where there are tools which are there for any languages. Right now, of course, there's no one size fits all, and again, we are building a commercial software, but the things is there are a lot of individual tools, like as I mentioned, for SCA, SAS, DAST and
Mhm.
RASP, there are a lot of open source tools are there. So program means building a governance around defining the best practices, and one of the big things which we are doing in this book is helping people define the best practices, because what we are saying is from our experiences, these are the things one need to do, and then there's no one size fits all. Like everything else, you take the program and tailor it to your needs. So now what happens here is from this perspective, that you when you have to build a program, now historically what we have seen is that 30% budget used to be application security, and people thought we will just get the individual tool like SCSS, TAST and RASP. Now that's great, so that is the technology aspect, but like when instances like log4j happens often, that is when the people thing comes in, because now what happens here is then when log4j happened and when SolarWinds happened, you had to take the output from every tool, SCSS, DAST, RASP and all, but then you go back into Excel sheets, you expect put everything into the Excel sheets, and that is where the mundane thing comes. You have all these false positives, and you have to sift through 10,000 findings, for example, for a medium organization for a log4j, and each finding takes 10 to 20 minutes. You do the maths, and the business case what the team came up with was like, okay, take the number of findings, 90 to 95% are false positive, and then let's say if you just do a match, if you have 10,000 finding and 9,000, to keep the math simple, are false positive, and it takes like 10 minutes, so you're talking about 9,000 times 10 is 90,000 minutes to just sift through these false positives. And if the loaded cost of a security engineer, depending upon the different parts of the world, in US let's say it's 100 to $150, you are talking about, tens and hundreds and thousands. So this is where people realized that they were being penny wise pound foolish. And I'm saying that it was okay when a 0 day was happening once every 5 or 10 years, right? Then you could afford to do that. But now when it's a Christmas event happening every year, guess what? That's when you need to be proactive, build a security program, and have automation, so that when it happens, that the platform can go and sift out that 9,000 findings, so that you have to focus on the things which is there. So there is a technology aspect, and that is where the need for a platform like Armor Code is becoming more and more imminent, is because people are realizing that we need to simplify application security operations by building an application security management program.
Yeah, there's a classic response or a phrase in security, just it depends. And that falls into risk, of course. We're talking about it depends on what you're talking about. A little bit of what you're talking to in the sense of it depends on the budget, on how people form their budget, where they focus on. And I think some of that, it depends on the proactive side of things. And here I'm thinking of cloud native versus legacy systems versus monoliths trying to be decomposed into microservices. So, looking at this then to try and say we want to build in security from I'm going to use another recent phrase, shift left, cliche. But that's the idea, to be defensive, to be more proactive about security so that the 0 days are actually more contained, perhaps. At least that's a narrative to build. But so when the it depends from this like cloud or microservices or monoliths, how has that influenced either application security budgets or even just the adoption of open source, the help of open source, or different ways to think about the it depends part of what teams are building?
So what happens is, you're spot on over there. Even in an organization, there are different business units and different engineering organizations. So we still run into organizations where one part of the business unit is like monolithic because they are building into chip or something like that, which gets released maybe once every twice a year or something like that. Now, in that particular case, moving security to the left may not be as much beneficial, whereas the organization we are releasing, companies like we have financial companies who are public companies who are our customers, who are releasing software every day or every week. And guess what, in that you really want to have shift left security. Now, one of the other challenges what was happening with the traditional solutions for shifting left and all was that at the end of the day there was no application security management layer, if you will, or the governance layer. So the weakest link is always the problem. So we talk to customers who have 50 application security engineers, but they have 5,000 pipelines. Now, what happens is when you are releasing 5,000 pipelines in a month, and you still have the security gates manual, then security 50 security team becomes the bottleneck. And this is where the platform like Armor Code comes into play, where it can automate all of those governance play. And just to give you an example, so let's say if Mike and John agree that okay, these five issues are the ones I want to look into this particular release, because when you're releasing once a week, you're not making a drastic changes, right? So that is one distinction that people need to do. People think about that, oh, I have five releases a week and they're sweating, but guess what, it could be as simple as changing an alphabet. That is the whole DevOps mentality. So the thing here is people need to take a step back and look what is being happening. And in that particular case, let's say if you are having a release and just to fix the spelling of John, guess what, do you really need to run those 1,000 test cases? No. Do you really need to fix the 1,000 findings which you found last week and you thought it was going to be okay? No. So for those things which are minimal and we had agreed upon, there should be an again automation. And this is where platforms like Armor Code is coming into play, where once you agree, and one thing which is very important which is happening is that risk based, as you said. Like historically, when I was a developer, I really didn't understand the notion of risk. Now, thankfully, in fact, one of the big change we are seeing is a lot of CISOs are also now reporting into CTO organization. So, which is a big change organizationally that people are making, instead of CISO reporting into CIO or CISO reporting directly to CEO or boards in certain cases. So now what's happening here is that at that point, that when we are doing all these things, we need to agree that if these issues are not fixed, what risk does it bring? So like again, and one of the features that in Armor Code we have is we delegate work, not responsibility. So we allow, and one of the big things which companies are doing is embracing security champion program. So what happens here is there's one AppSec engineer to 10 security champions to 10 or 100 developers. Now what happens here is, if there's one AppSec engineer to 100 developers, can you look and understand the level of details of the problem? No. The best person to understand that how big that issue is, developer. Now what happens here is, with all due respect, the smartest of AppSec engineer when they are 100 or 200 developers is ending up doing program management and also managing the Excel sheets. So now why don't we take that power and hand it over to the developers? So now in our platform, what we do is we let the developers go and say, I want to fix it, I don't want to fix it. Now when they do that, we actually map it to the risk and we bring the visibility all to the engineering leadership. Because in the days before Armor Code or platforms like Armor Code, what used to happen is, and when I was a developer, I didn't know what to do. Right now what you will say is like, if I don't know and what risk is bring, then I'm focusing on revenue generating. But that is the visibility if you're bringing here. So that is the need to bring things into shift left or shift right, is getting that risk based approach and bringing that visibility. So that is where, sorry, a long answer for a short question, but it is it's a very complicated, and these were the kind of discussions we are having, right? Like, what is the right approach, who should be owning what, right? And who still owns the responsibility, but you are like responsible for securing something but not having understanding of the code.
Yeah, and I like the principle of bringing more of the decision making into the developers, especially about, is this a vuln? Set aside the false positives, even just, is this vuln high risk, low risk, and leave the false positive just an aspect of the feedback loop of the quality of the tooling that is fully the responsibility of security. But speaking of responsibility, there are also often competing incentives here, and I don't mean bad actors in the sense of developers versus a conflict in that sense, but more of developers see, this is the risk we have. We are prioritizing a release date. We're prioritizing engineering features, where application security team might be prioritizing, well, this falls against a best practice, or this is what we learned from the OOPS top 10 number 3 or 4, who knows, or some list that says this is why we want to fix this. So help us tease out a little bit how that discussion of responsibility has played out in across different organizations that you've talked to.
So I think so. You touched a very important point, because it's all about responsibilities, who owns what, and so few things which I noticed which is happening, and there is again, it depends. There's no one size fits all, but what happens is depending upon the organization. So, for example, if some organization is pure software organization, so what we have noticed is in those cases the CISOs in a lot of cases are reporting into the CTO organization, so that when they talk about risk, the engineering leader also understands and the responsibilities at the engineering risk. Now, one of the aspect what cloud world used to say, right? Like when Amazons of the world came in and they use the word shared responsibility.
Mm,
In application security world also, that words is very applicable. It's not being talked about much, which is called the shared responsibility. So security is a shared responsibility between the security team and the development team. To your point, Mike, here, that depending upon the issues, it's no longer that it's just a security team, because it's the development team who's writing the software and moving fast. I love your cat here.
I know.
So basically, but what happens is with that you have these two responsibilities. So there are several different things which are happening, right, where we are having these responsibilities, and what companies like Armor Code are doing in the platform, bringing that visibility and accountability. So for instance, now when a developer is deferring 50 issues, and if it is going to impact the security scope, right, then the leadership knows about that, so then it's being a conscious choice, right? So that is where, and in fact, Mike, this is kind of very interesting that we are talking about volume 2 of our book, and in the volume 2 of the purple book, this will be an area, because this was an area where a lot of leaders said that needs more attention,
Mm,
and that's the area we are going to go into more details. Like first, volume 1 was like, okay, why application security, what is application security, what is software, what is the business case. It was like, as Simon Sinek says, starting with the why, right? Now the things here is like how we can make it better, how we can fix it, and it's not the security guy, it's not the engineering guy who owns the responsibility. So that's the area, and that's the thing which security leaders are talking about next. And that is what we are even driving in the purple book community, and that's where I love and encourage people to come in here, is because we embrace this diverse perspective, the pain points, and eventually my belief is that at least 60 to 70% should be the same, irrespective of the industry, the best practices. And if we can, over the period of time, thrash those 70% common practices, whether you are a manufacturing, whether you are a banking system, or whether you are a social media company, the world will be a much safer place, because then you could take those 70 things and then tweak it to your individual industries. In one industry, responsibility may lie under engineering organization, whereas in another organization, the responsibility may lie in security,
mm.
but at least people are aware. And so that is where I when it comes to responsibility.
Yeah, it definitely wouldn't. We're still, I think it's fair to say, more art than science among all of these practices. So anything that, at least if we can more agree on what the art looks like, will at least be one step towards getting to science. Maybe as kind of a closing question here, you're mentioning volume 2 of the book and things that have changed, things that haven't been addressed or appreciated well enough, or perhaps need more investment. Maybe give us some hints, some ideas of what else might be in that volume 2, or what are the new conversations that the community is having this year.
So one of the piece here, right, and what we found out, because we started this community almost year and a half, like it just sounds like yesterday. And what has happened is, time flies when you're having fun, and the whole idea about this book was to kind of keep it open and think through it. And as the security leaders got together from these diverse backgrounds, we realized that yes, it's very important, the message is clear. That's why we had like a record number of people join in at AppSecCon, because there is a big awareness that application security needs to be addressed. Now the second piece is like, and then that's what we call it as a victory, right? Victory of like the whole idea about that community and the book was to bring education, and you don't need to pay $100,000 to organizations or get a consulting from big fours of the world, right? So again, yes, and I'm not undermining any of them. Some of them are sponsors of that event, so which is good thing. So I think so we all believe in having that education of that. So that is the main goal of volume 1, which is done. Now the second piece which we are hearing is like, okay, now that we know that, why we should focus on is how we should focus on it. And again, keeping the people aspect is like, okay, we need to have a security leaders, but at the same time the technology leaders. So one of the things which we are doing here is the community which was primarily focused for security leaders, we are looking, as the demand is coming from the people and the community leaders, is to start adding the technology leaders into this community. And again, it's too early, Mike. I was on a call earlier to with a New York chapter lead about talking about the volume 2, but it is right hot off the press, if you will, is that yes, we may need to embrace and bring some more engineering leader into the community.
Yeah.
And the topics about that, and we are working on the table of contents, if you will, would be how do we have the responsibilities, how do we ensure that we kind of do it, how we make it an incentive. Because again, when since the community is about the people, we are not going to talk about rocket science and the technology or armored code or xyz. No, what we are going to talk about is, as a engineering leader, as a security leader, now that we know that it needs two people to make things secure, it's everybody's responsibility. Now it is about like what and how we can help. So the one thing which we are embracing is as a culture, that security leaders are opening up and not saying that, hey, just pushing the ball over the fence. It's like, okay, how can we work together? And the same thing is with the engineering leaders. Hey, we understand the significance of security, how can we help, right? So that is the camaraderie. So that is where you will see in the evolution of purple book, as well as the volume 2 will be like, there might be more leaders of from coming from engineering along with that, because that is where we believe is the medium or happy medium for software security
Indeed,
for
yeah, and that'll be great to see that evolution, because there's a big difference between here's what application security think the practices should be, go forth and do them, versus engineering being part of the discussion that says, wait, do you realize exactly how we build software today? Do you realize actually how we deploy it, what we need? And that's communication is, I think, more fruitful for developing practices that are going to actually be adopted and executed on in any meaningful manner.
No, and absolutely. And we did have a couple of engineering leaders. So we had a good money CTO or ex-VP of engineering of New York Times. So we did that on purpose, right?
Nice.
When we curated the community to get that kind of inputs. Now, what we found out here is that we need more of that. And that is the whole idea about, is like with the communities, we are learning from each other. It's a community-based learning, if you will.
That's awesome. Yes, and I think another theme in security is we always want more, and we would always want more of your time, Nikhil. But we're going to have to wrap up here. So I want to say thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I want to say thank you to John, and thank you to everybody who's been listening. We're going to take a quick break now and return with news of the week.